Namaste, welcome, and thank you for joining the Project Bharat podcast, episode 2. Now, I'm very excited today to have a guest over with us, Ashish. I discovered Ashish a few months ago. For me, he's a primary researcher on the field of genetics, Indian history, and he's looking at raw data himself, coming up with conclusions that make great sense. And it'll be lovely to talk to him today to understand his take on genetics, linguistics, and their implications on Indian history. So, Ashish, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Amritanshu, for this podcast. It will be first experience for me also to speak with someone like on this medium. So my name is Ashish Kulkarni. I run the archaeogenetics blog at agenetics.blogspot.com, and recently also joined Twitter mostly to um, promote my theories and what I think of the genetics field, especially with respect to India. So I'll keep this brief because I'm excited to go on to the subject matter. So my background is that I'm an electronics engineer from NIT Surathkal in Karnataka, and post that I did my MBA from IIM Calcutta. And from 2000 to 2016, I was an investment banker working in Mumbai. Post which my family came back to Ahmedabad and we run a business out of Ahmedabad. And I my interest in genetics has basically started in 2017 2018 onwards. I started following I think on Twitter or some social media platform that there's this theory, Aryan invasion or Aryan migration, and this is what it says. And then the field of genetics was up and coming. There were lots of media reports on the genetics of the country. So I started following the Eurogenes blog, and
Mhm.
from there I started researching on my own. So much so that now I basically use all the tools that all the research papers use in their analysis, including statistics, F3 statistics, QPD, ADM for modeling the data set, the data samples that we have. So all this has been researched on my own, and to put it, I mean, to be frank, the scientists have made it easy for people to use it. It's not that it's some
Okay.
hidden tools which no one can use. They are simple to use. The tutorials are very good. So I've been working on all these samples, raw data samples, which the scientists have put up since the past 3 years, since 2019, especially after
Mhm.
the preprint of Narasimhan, when all these Swat Valley samples were published, apart from Central Asian samples. So
Mhm.
I got onto doing my own analysis of what if the paper, what it's saying is actually true or not. And basically, I think apart from the researchers, I would be the one person to have analyzed at least these Swat Valley samples the most of, I think,
Yeah.
anyone on this planet. So
Right.
so that's a very brief background of me. So I don't have a formal education in genetics, but I have a formal education in statistics, data science,
Mhm.
and so on. And the tools that they themselves use can be used by us also in meaningful ways, as described, and following all the conditions as described by the scientists in the tutorials themselves. And we can
Mhm.
reach and we can follow. There are hundreds of papers, and they have all the settings in the papers that they have used. We can use the same settings, and based on that we can also analyze those same samples that the researchers analyze.
Right. Well, great, and exactly. So that you just gave us a sense for the kind of uh, research, the kind of expertise you bring to this. So before we get to that and those details, could you share a sense, for the way I understand it? Genetics, of course, and genetic origins, dispersals, they span across time. So there are a lot of stories and a lot of implications we can find from them. But in India, they seem contentious around one issue first, which is the Aryan invasion migration issue. So, can you give a
Right.
landscape there of what is that issue and how does genetics come in? What is contentious about it?
Um, First, let us define what this Aryan invasion theory exactly
Yeah.
is, or the Aryan
Yeah.
migration theory, because it basically says it basically gives a timeline and the source of
Mm-hmm.
people who brought the Indo-Aryan languages into India. So the timeline is also
Right.
very important. So
Mm-hmm.
it says that around 1500 BCE, there were a group of steppe people, Aryans they call them, and they came and invaded India or migrated to India in large numbers, and then they were able to basically change the whole language of all the people from Rajasthan to from Gujarat, Rajasthan, Haryana, Punjab to Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Kashmir and so Afghanistan, Punjab, everyone they changed the language of all these people, and possibly even gave the Vedic culture um,
Mm-hmm.
to Indians. So that is the theory. Now,
Mm-hmm.
firstly, genes don't tell us any of this. I mean, they are just a corroborating evidence. The primary evidence for this has to be genetics, linguistics, and the Vedic corpus itself. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
Genetics can only be a corroborating factor because we are now conversing in English, but we don't have any English DNA in us.
Right.
If the archaeologist 1,000 years from now digs up my house, he will find a number plate and a board in English. But that doesn't mean that
Mm-hmm.
we have English DNA. So this is genetics will just be a corroborating factor, the corroborating science. Uh, but this is not what the researchers are doing currently. So they go, I mean, at least the amateur bloggers, what they do is they go and look for some step ancestry, 5-10% in some culture, and then they say, oh, look, there's step ancestry, so they must have spoken
Mm-hmm.
Indo-European language. I mean, that is not how um, research should work. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so linguistics and archaeology will be, and the Vedic corpus should be the first, uh, should provide the primary evidence. In that, Vedic corpus and archaeology should be primary. Linguistics, because it's not a very hard science, according to me, so secondary. Genetics
Mm-hmm.
should be either secondary or tertiary to this.
Mm-hmm.
So what
Mm-hmm.
we actually see, so that's the theory. What we actually see is we have 1100 to 1000 BCE samples from Swat Valley in Suvastu Valley in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and they show that step ancestry up to a tune of 15 odd percent, or going to maximum 20%, entered the ancestors of these people around 1600, 1650 BCE,
Mm-hmm.
along with BMAC ancestry, which is Bactriana Margiana ancestral complex,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which is in Turkmenistan region, exemplified by sites at Konur, Zarkutan, um, Sapali Tepe, and so on. Uh, this is the part which the Narsimhan paper misses, that the Suvastu Valley samples have BMAC ancestry in them, but it is not
Mm-hmm.
missed to any in the amateur genetics community. All of them now accept by their own modeling that BMAC ancestry is certainly present along with step ancestry in
Mm-hmm.
the Suvastu Valley. The second important conclusion was that the part of the Aryan invasion theory definition was that it was definitely males who got the languages to India, because only males can force language change to such an extent in a large country like India. And the thing is that steppe, Sintrashtra, and all those cultures, the ancient DNA from all those cultures are 100%. The males are 100% R1A on the Y chromosome.
Okay.
So that makes analysis a bit easier actually, because if it was 50% this, 50% that, then it would have become a bit more difficult to analyze. But since R1, since Sintashta even the other step samples from the Bronze Age are 100% R1A, but we just find three R1A from Suvastu. One
Okay.
is from 500 BCE and the other two are around 1000 BCE. Out of 45 samples. So that's just 5% of the That's just 5% of the male DNA that is directly descendant of the steppe males.
Hmm.
If we assume that that's the same R1A Z93 from the steppe. So that's the first clue that I got after the preprint of the paper was published, that this does not fit with what the people have been saying, what the Kurganists or the steppe theorists have been saying. They
Hmm.
have been saying that they have been actually waiting for the first DNA from post Bronze Age India, uh, waiting for a large percentage of R1A to be found in the male samples. But this was
Hmm.
completely contradictory to what was expected.
Hmm.
Um, Now you see all these people, pro-Kurganist people, bloggers and journalists, etc. I won't take the name, but they were all expecting a huge chunk of R1A from these samples, but it's
Hmm.
not there. So this is the first clue that their simplistic theory is not correct. There is something
Hmm.
more, which is more complex. Um, the 15% step ancestry in Suvastu seems to be mediated via step females because they have found T1A1 mtDNA in a few samples, which is also found in step. Um, so this does not explain. So what this basically saying is that the Suvastu local people were taking in wives from the Central Asian region, BMAC and
Hmm.
steppe.
Hmm. Hmm.
Uh, so this is actually the main point from the data of Narasimhan, because this is the stuff we were waiting for, the first
Hmm.
samples from the India Pakistan region, and it
Hmm.
does not really show a huge migration from the steppe. Neither is it male mediated.
Hmm.
Um, but the paper goes on to claim that although this was female mediated steppe ancestry in Suvastu, they see, quoting an earlier paper, Silva et al. 2017, that the modern Indian males, the R1A in the steppe ancestry in them is male mediated.
Hmm.
So this conclusion which they make in the paper, and then they go on to say this proves that the steppe people got. This provides good evidence that the steppe people brought the common IE language into India, which is also shared which also shares features with Balto-Slavic, which is to the west
Hmm. The step.
of the steppe. But it is not based on this new evidence. It is not based on the new data that they got in the paper. It is just based on
Okay.
the old theory and which analyzes modern Indians, 2017 paper,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
right? Uh, so this is their Harvard line, or the narrative that they have,
Hmm.
possibly influenced by Indologists at Harvard like Witzel.
Right.
And the actual data, the new data, which was so important, say it does not um, it does not directly show that there was a large scale male mediated step invasion. It was hardly 15%. I mean, one could claim that it's negligible
Hmm.
in terms of causing big language changes. So after I read this preprint, then I got into it because now there was a chance to see what was actually happening. And I always knew that the story given by the Steppe theorist was very simplistic, and this is not what has happened, probably has
Hmm.
happened. So this is a brief of the Aryan invasion theory and what the only ancient DNA
Hmm.
related to that time period, Iron Age, Bronze Age, and so on, what it actually shows us.
Hmm. Right. So, and I want to check my understanding on a number of steps over here. So, first, maybe also for people who might not know, so we are talking about the steppe ancestry. So, this correlates actually to the model where Indo-European languages, it is thought that the steppe region is where they originated, is where Proto-Indo-European originated. So, it is that model, right, where this genetic landscape is being fit onto. This thing is important because we're trying to find how would those people have dispersed from there, and how would they have reached other parts of Eurasia where Indo-European languages eventually spread. that's a correct way to understand how this is fitting with the
The
original
I'll
theory.
ex- I'll explain the genetic and linguistic models that are currently favored
Hmm.
for pi. So, given all the commonalities between the Indo-Iranian and Indo-Iranian branch, with even with the other branches of Indo-European, including
Hmm.
Anatolian, Tokharian,
Right. Greek.
Balto-Slavic,
Hmm.
Greek, Germanic, and so on. So there has to be. So the theory is that there has to be a common people who spread in all directions and carry the languages somehow.
Hmm.
The question is that where were these people and what time frame?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
far the consensus theory has been that um, the steppe, uh, Pontic-Caspian steppe region, just north of the
Hmm.
Just north of the Caucasus Mountains, is the genetic is the region from where the whole of Europe got the I language.
Hmm.
So let's leave aside the part if this is pi or not, but at least it's one of the nodes from which
Right.
at least Europe, Western Europe and Eastern Europe got its languages, and you can we can actually very clearly see it that there has been a large scale actually invasion of Europe from by these people post
Yeah.
3000 BCE. So if you look at corded ware cultures, French bell beaker
Hmm.
culture, um, uh, and the Synthastra culture 2000 BCE and so on. From 3000 to 2000 BCE, this Yamnaya like culture
Hmm.
replaced between 50 to 90% of the existing ancestry of Europe.
Yeah.
So even without linguistic and archaeological evidence,
Hmm.
I do believe that there is good chunk of evidence to show that this Yamnaya like ancestry which spread like crazy throughout Europe is responsible for the commonality
Yeah.
in these languages.
Yeah.
So that's not a crazy claim, and I can accept that as a hypothesis, unless like something major comes up which is against this. So
Hmm.
this is the so now the question is that what is the steppe ancestry of the Pontic Caspian steppe just over the Caucasus Mountains?
Hmm.
Well, it's a mixture of European hunter gatherer and Iranian ancestry, 50%, 50%.
Okay.
Now, East European hunter gatherers are samples were found in 6000 7000 BC in Karelia Oblast,
Hmm.
uh, near Moscow, somewhere near Moscow or west of Moscow, just north of Moscow. That region. I mean, not
Hmm.
near the Caucasus Mountains, but just straight up north. You can think of it. I mean, quite north of the Caucasus Mountains. So that's the
Hmm.
east. So they were hunter gatherers. Their diet consisted of animals and fish and so on. Uh, there was no farming, no Neolithic, no herding of animals, nothing of that sort.
Hmm.
So this is around 5000 6000 BCE, and they mix with an Iranian 50% Iranian ancestry at the border of the Caucasus Mountains or near those mountains.
Okay.
This forms the basis of the steppe ancestry, which becomes successful throughout Europe.
Yeah.
In such a way as to replace 50 to 80% of the autosomal ancestry, 50 to 90% of the autosomal ancestry of that region.
Hmm.
Um, Now, the new models basically say that the pi was this Iranian region, Iranian component in steppe. So the
Okay.
pi is Iran, from which it spread west to Anatolia and through Pontic Caspian steppe to the whole of Europe and maybe east to India. There are
Okay.
two routes which they propose for India. One is directly from Iran to India, 5000, 4000 BCE. And the other is through Sintashta again to India, making Sanskritic languages as the youngest languages in the whole pi tree, in the whole IE
Hmm.
tree,
Hmm.
and coming as late as 1500, 1200 BCE.
Hmm.
So for India, they have two models. At least Max Planck has two models. Harvard Lab has very clearly stated their position that they believe the steppe
Yeah.
ancestry around 1500 BCE to be the origin of Indo-Aryan languages. But Max Planck University, because they collaborate with with Jena University Linguistics Department. not
Okay.
with so they have their own sort of theory, linguistic theory, and they have kept the option open that Iran from directly from the Pai region of North Iran, uh, 5000 BC or 4000 BC or so, the people came to India, and therefore we have Indo-Aryan languages in India. So
Hmm.
these are the
Hmm.
two theories right now. Even Harvard I think, is fine with an Iranian origin at this point. So the region would
Okay.
be in Iran, um, south of Armenia,
Hmm.
near,
Hmm.
near the Armenian region, south of Caucasus. That's what the current that's what they are heading. That's the direction in which the research is heading.
Right. Right. So you mentioned these papers, right? A Narasimhan paper, and you talked about how this quoted an earlier Silva and group paper. Uh,
Right,
uh, I remember that, for example, when we read Tony Joseph's book, Early Indians, so that
right.
quotes or relies on the Narasimhan paper to form a lot of its narrative. Is that correct?
I have not read Tony Joseph's book,
Okay,
so
okay. So the entire notion, for example, of ancestral South Indians, ancestral North Indians, which I think is a genetic split we find maybe 60,000 years ago. And then there is maybe an input around 7,000 years ago of what is called the Zagros agriculturalists. So that is the input we see into the Indus Valley side from Iran. So is that the genetic trail that you are currently referring to, or this is now a different genetic trail with a different timeline that we found?
is this what Tony Joseph's book says, that 7000 BCE there were Iranian Zagros farmers which came to
7,000
India?
years ago. 7,000
Five,
years ago, if I remember
so
correctly. Yeah.
so 5000 BCE, right? Okay. No, there is no evidence to support this claim.
Okay.
Neither does the Narasimhan paper 2019 prove such a claim. Neither does the Shinde et al. Harappan paper of the Rakhigarhi sample
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
actually disproves this claim of 5000 BCE Iranian ancestry entering India. What we
Hmm.
have found is that Zagros is Western Iran, and 8K BCE, 8000 BCE is where they find the Iran Neolithic ancestry
Okay.
from West Iran. But what we have found, and what I have found in my research as well, which corroborates what Shinde et al. Published, is
Hmm.
that this ancestry, Zagrosian ancestry, is a cousin of the Iranian ancestry which we see in India.
Okay.
So they share a common ancestor, and but the two populations from that common ancestor split more than 12,000 years ago, before 12,000 BC.
Before 12,000 BC.
Before 12,000 years ago, before
Okay.
10,000 BC,
Okay. Okay. Okay.
and it could even be 15,000. They don't have a lower date. They just know that they split. They were not together
By that time.
by that time. So the Zagrosian
Hmm.
farmers are not the ones who came to India.
Okay. Okay.
They are a separate branch of the India-Iran ancestors.
Hmm. Hmm.
The
Hmm.
Indian ancestors, we don't know where they were because we don't have old DNA samples.
Hmm.
We don't know where they were residing, but we know that they are not Zagrosian farmers. They are only related to Zagrosian farmers.
Okay. Okay. And
So
yeah, please continue.
the claim that in 5000 BC Iranians came to India, there is nothing to justify that.
Right. I mean, just one disclaimer there. Maybe I remember it wrong, whether it was 7,000 years ago or 7,000 BC. But it
It
was
doesn't
from this
matter.
paper itself. Okay.
It doesn't matter either way. There is no proof for this claim, and
Right.
and I'll just add, there is no proof to the claim also that these people were staying in India for 10,000 years.
Hmm. Hmm.
We just have to find ancient DNA and sample them and see that if we find 7,000 BCE samples from Punjab, and if we
Hmm.
sample them, then we have to basically just check, what type of samples are these, and then we
Right.
can have a confirmation. But the claim, my own hypothesis is that these people, these what I call India Neolithic people.
Mm-hmm.
This is the term that I use because I have to give it some term. This different
Mm-hmm.
node in my modeling, I have to give it some name. I find India Neolithic convenient, not because it was present in India, but because it gives a large chunk of ancestry to the Indus Valley, Indus periphery samples.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
so we can't say where they were, but my hypothesis is that they were very close to Punjab area for a long
Okay.
time,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even 10,000 BC. We don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And they were there, they were possibly there unadmixed with the Onge or the AHG or AASI or whatever you call it.
Right. Right. Right.
So
Which is a much
that's
deeper ancestry in the subcontinent, right?
which is a much older and a much deeper
Yeah.
ancestry in the subcontinent.
Right.
Possibly existing 30,000 to 40,000 years ago. We
Mm-hmm.
don't know because we have no samples, but we know
Mm-hmm.
what genetically it should look like. We
Mm.
do know that, and it's very clear that it's one of the old East Eurasian ancestry which dominated most of East Asia, um, the Asia east of India. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a similar kind of ancestry, and it's there. I actually want to get hands on those samples. I hope we get it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we should find. I think we should find the trace if we get some samples from East India or Burma. I think we
Mm-hmm.
have very old samples, and I think we have a
Right.
shot at sampling that AASI ancestry.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned that in the SWAT samples, we also found a component of BMAC ancestry, right? Bacteria margiana ancestry in the SWAT samples,
Not
correct?
not a not a minor amount, some 30 odd %.
Okay, right. And do we know the source of that BMAC ancestry also? Is it the case that we can trace it back to the steppe or somewhere, or that stands
No,
separate?
no. BMAC has no step ancestry.
Right,
It's
right.
co- it's comprised of Shaire Sokta ancestry.
Hmm.
So and Seh Gabi Chalcolithic. So basically all Iranian ancestry. It's Iranian
Hmm.
ancestry, which is a bit high in the Anatolian farmer component, and it has
Hmm.
absolutely nothing to do with step.
Right, right. Now, when we talk of these all these genetic migrations and trails that you've just referred to, and these are often connected, of course, to Indo-European origins and dispersals. But do we have any sense for, there were so many other language groups, and in the Indian subcontinent itself, we have Dravidian, Austroasiatic, and other language groups. So, is there any reason why the focus is on just this one language group and its spread, and why is all genetic data being mapped to this alone? Surely there were a lot of other interminglings and other speaker groups moving around in all of Eurasia, right, in the past 12,000 years.
I mean, they have spoken a lot about Dravidian languages also because
Okay.
if it suits their narrative, they'll use anything.
Hmm.
so So they have been claiming that even Dravidian is from Iran, and
Hmm.
Indo-Aryan, of course, is from the steppe, according to them. So
Hmm.
both Dravidian and Indo-Aryan they claim as from outside. Tibeto-Burman is,
Hmm.
of course, Tibeto-Burman, and
Hmm.
Munda language, the Austroasiatic language family.
Austroasiatic.
We are pretty sure it came to India from the east coast around 2000 BC. So it's also from Southeast Asia.
Hmm.
So then
Hmm.
we are basically, if we accept all their theories, we are left with no language family from India. Everything came from outside, and we were
Hmm.
not speaking any known language. And we were, I mean, that's just that's just a bit too far fetched for me to accept without. I mean, at least there should have been some sort of knowledge of the pre-Dravidian or pre-Indo-Aryan language spoken somewhere.
Hmm.
Um, it's nowhere to be found. So the Dravidian theory for sure I do not accept. I reject both those theories. Dravidian is for sure from India itself,
Hmm.
and there are many recent papers which basically analyzes the substrate of Indo-Aryan languages. One is John Peterson 2017, The
Yeah.
other is Ivani et al. 2021. That
Hmm.
even Marathi and Konkani really don't have a Dravidian grammatical substrate. I mean, what
Hmm.
happens
Hmm.
is so I'm linguistics is not my field. I'm just repeating my understanding of what those papers are saying.
Sure.
They basically say that you see in Eastern Indo-Aryan languages like Bengali, Odia, Maithili, you
Hmm.
very clearly see if you if you gather 28 grammatical features of lots of Indian languages, then
Hmm.
you will clearly see these Eastern Asian languages have features resembling the Austroasiatic Munda people.
Okay.
And their theory is that this is because the Indo-Aryan languages in the Eastern Indian regions, uh, they over time converted the Munda speakers to Indo-Aryan, who and therefore these Munda like grammatical structures of the Munda language came into the Indo-Aryan languages of the region, which is a
Mm.
logical, which seems logical to me. So the Eastern Indo-Aryan language is basically we can say that the Indo-Aryan languages from Northwest India went east and slowly converted the mother tongues of these people. But the Western Indo-Aryan languages, they show no such thing either to Munda or Dravidian. They
Hmm.
show no real substrate. Even the earliest Vedic texts do not really show any Munda or Dravidian substrate
Yeah.
according to
Yeah.
Witzel and so on.
Hmm.
So the question is, yeah. Uh, so there's no definitely according to in my mind there was no Dravidian language in north of India. Uh, Maybe in small pockets somewhere. Maybe it was multilingual. I can't say. I mean, genetics cannot say all of these things.
Hmm.
But there is no large scale evidence of large scale Dravidian presence in the north of India, where the modern or even Prakrit versions of Indo-Aryan languages were present. There is no evidence to prove any major interaction with Dravidian people and Dravidian speaking people being converted into Indo-Aryan speakers. There's really no evidence for that of that sort.
Yeah. Yeah. And we should add, right, that even the Peterson paper that you referenced and you've tweeted about it as well, along
Right.
with some other linguists also, Brahui, which is found in modern Balochistan and is supposedly a part of Dravidian language family. It actually turns out it is a much more recent arrival in that area, right? Maybe around 1,000, 1,500 years ago only from southern India. So it's not actually evidence of maybe a pre Vedic or pre Indo-Aryan Dravidian presence in that region, correct?
It's very confusing. The Brahui is very confusing to me because the Peterson paper shows that its underlying grammatical structure is Indo-Aryan,
Hmm.
whereas
Hmm.
15% of its words are Dravidian,
Hmm.
whereas it resides in a region with Iranic. Balochi is an Iranic language.
Yeah,
It's like an
yeah.
extreme confusing. It's very confusing to me. I can't say. There are lots of papers which are saying that 1000 CE, like 1000
Hmm.
years back, there was a group of people from the Deccan region
Yeah.
uh, who migrated there for trade or for religion or for some purpose.
Hmm.
I can accept that theory. However, there's a recent genetic paper which says that there is absolutely no genetic difference between the Brahui people and the Balochi people
Hmm.
genetically. So they
Hmm.
say that this proves that that paper says is that this is proof that Dravidian is the original language of this region. I mean, this is. I mean, how can genetics prove all these things? I don't understand. So there's
Yeah,
a lot of overstepping the boundaries in terms of
yeah,
conclusions that these papers make.
indeed.
Um, there can be n number of reasons. I am speaking English right now. It doesn't mean
Hmm.
that that, and I have no. I am very similar to the Gujarati speaker next to me. It does not mean that um, English was the language of this region. So
Yeah, yeah. And to that, I mean, tell me what you think about it. I would even add that even though we are both speaking in English, that doesn't actually mean that we've inherited British culture also completely. So our cultural kit might still be derived from a different linguistic origin. So
exactly, it's
language,
complicated.
culture, genetics, all these three things are the way they flow and move around. We
It's
have to
it's
be careful with the
it's
correl. Yeah.
yeah, it's complicated, and I wouldn't want to simplify it
Hmm.
at all.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, when it comes to the Narsimhan paper, you did do some primary findings and you tweeted about issues with the standard deviation taken. And then I think you've written about this to them as well. Can you take us through that? What was your finding? What issue discrepancy did you see? And what's going on with that? Have you been communicating about it?
Yeah, so uh, eh, so in the Narsimhan paper, what they have done is they have taken 140 modern Indian groups from including some from Pakistan as well and the rest of the country, and they
Hmm.
have modeled them using QPADM as a model of AHG Andamanese plus Indus Valley IVC,
Hmm.
which are the Indus Valley outliers uh, from Shire Sokta, the Burn city,
Hmm.
around 2500 BCE. And this is the second ancestry, and the third is the step ancestry. So they have modeled these 140 people as these three ancestries,
Okay.
and they have had a idea of a model which for India, which was the ANI ASI model.
Hmm.
So a two source model, the ANI ancestral North Indian and the ancestral South Indian.
Hmm.
Now, what they attempted to do in this paper was to model all of these 140 groups from these three separate ancestries into two ancestries, ANI and ASI.
Okay.
And they thought that maybe all of the 140 will fit as a mixture of only two groups rather than three. So three groups from a triangle, and
Hmm.
if you plot it on the PCA chart, the coordinate chart,
Hmm.
whereas if it's a mixture of two ancestries, 140 people should all fall on this line.
Okay.
But if it's a mixture of three ancestries, then it should fall within the triangle.
Hmm.
So the idea is, could they model all these ancestries 140 groups to fall on this line?
Hmm.
And they could not. And they could not narrow down the three ancestry model into a two ancestry model. And what
Okay.
they show is, what they say is that this model fails due to an excess need for step ancestry in Brahmins of Nepal, Bihar, Uttar Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh,
Hmm.
which are eastern Brahmin groups, Brahmin jatis, and they say that this and the z scores for those are the deviations from this line. So if it should fall on this line, the best fit model, which
Hmm.
minimizes overall error for all 140 groups, but the Brahmins lie here quite far away from
Hmm.
this line.
Hmm.
So the deviation from that line is the z score for them. It's So they say that there's excess step ancestry needed for Brahmins, and this proves that there is some special relation between Brahmins and the step ancestry, and
Hmm.
this makes them sense to them because they have this whole model of the step ancestry giving the
Correct.
Vedic religion to the country. There are many
Hmm.
issues with that analysis. Um, Firstly, why should a faulty model be used to deduce any conclusions? I mean, they say
Hmm.
if if it's a two source model and it fails, uh, because there is no way to fit all 140 groups into sources, three is the minimum, then it necessarily does not mean that only step component is the cause of the issue. There's the other side of there's the other side of the either the triangle or the line segment, which is causing the issue to the bad fit. What they
Hmm.
have, basically the method that they used uh, is contentious for me.
Hmm.
And when
Okay.
I modeled and when I made a three source model and fit all the 140 exactly, I made it. It's there on my blog post. I
Hmm.
modeled them as ANI, which is step plus IVC, uh, three ancestries: ANI, ancestral Indian, which is IVC plus AHG, and third is pure AHG. So I found out, what I prove is that these three sources um, are enough to model all 140 populations with almost zero error to each one of them.
Okay.
And what I found was that these Eastern Brahmins are special not because of increased need for step ancestry,
Hmm.
but because of an increased need for an AHG sort of a Munda sort of an ancestry.
Okay.
Uh,
Okay.
uh, to the complete lack of the need of IBC like ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
So this zero IBC and 100 AHG or 100 AHG requirement which these special Brahmins have is what is causing them to they are misrecognizing this as the need for excess step.
Mm-hmm.
Because ताली दो हाथ से नहीं बजती है type आप समझ लो. In their model there is not it's not that only one thing is causing the model to fail. There are multiple things, and they
Mm-hmm.
have similarly, there's a population called Panta Kapu. I think it is a Reddy. I think Reddys are Panta Kapus, but Andhra population,
Mm-hmm.
which was also an outlier in their model itself. And the reason in my three source model it's an outlier is the opposite. It
Mm-hmm.
requires almost zero AHG ancestry, but a lot of IVC ancestry.
Okay.
But all these populations are okay with having ANI as the common source. It's not like Brahmins require a special population which has high step. The
Mm-hmm.
Jats, all the other Indians require the same ANI source as the Brahmins. Although the
Mm-hmm.
percentage of the ANI will differ in all. Some might have 20% ANI, some might have 25, some might have 5% ANI. But the source required has the same ratio of step to IVC.
Mm.
So what I'm trying to say is that Brahmins are the Eastern Brahmins are special, probably because they inhabited erstwhile Munda speaking regions. So
Okay.
Bihar,
Okay.
and what they are seeing is not a need for extra step ancestry, but rather an extra AHG ancestry.
Mm-hmm.
Which is very specific to Eastern Brahmins, and that's why you will not see in his own paper the other Brahmins from the other regions, Karnataka, Haryana, Pandit from Kashmir. They don't have these. They don't show these deviances from the two source fit.
Mm-hmm.
So but it's just hazy stuff, which I don't really, which shouldn't really be part of scientific papers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So, and the second part is so Brahmins, okay, so these Brahmins have 20-25% step ancestry overall. And if you
Okay.
compare it to a Tamil person or a South Indian person, Kerala, they might have 10% step ancestry. Uh, so statistically, I mean, if you take all of India, then yes, Brahmins will have more step ancestry, statistically speaking, on an average than the rest of India. But that's not a fair comparison because we know that
Mm.
Brahmins are an ultimately northern population. The Vedic region is Haryana, Punjab. So we have to compare it with all the different jatis and castes of the Haryana Punjab region. And when you do that, we find that they don't have they have the statistically insignificant difference in the step ancestry on an average between Brahmins all over India and Rajasthan, Delhi, Haryana, Punjab, Kashmir, all castes.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so it just says that they are from that stock of people. Just Brahmins are ultimately northwestern people.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So, this is in principle, I do believe that yes, we should be able to take facts and findings on their own merit, and we need not, impugn a poor agenda or bad faith on anyone. But what my experience has been when we look at linguistic models, when we look at the kind of textual analysis done of the Rig Veda, and we look even a step deeper within, we find that there are conclusions made or definitive narratives formed which are just not validated by the actual data. And it seems from what you are also uncovering that something similar can be said about genetics as well. So, but why do you think that is the case? That when a deeper analysis of any of these things reveals far more nuances, complications, and uncertain areas. That in the mainstream, we have these definitive narratives that keep getting repeated and compounded through repetition.
I think it's confirmation bias. I think
Okay.
that I think they have a theory in mind, and whatever. So,
Mm-hmm.
if the first thing that comes in aid of that theory, they will accept it with
Mm-hmm.
moderate amount of sanity check,
Mm-hmm.
and they will go ahead with it. For India, the step theorist claim is very simple. We see R1A in India, which is also there in Russia, and we see some
Mm-hmm.
step ancestry in India and in Brahmins and so on. So for them, it's as simple as that. There is nothing more to it. It's as simple as that
Mm-hmm.
for them. So it proves that this is the only possible connection, genetic connection that the Eastern Europeans can have with India.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I so for them there is and it's appealing too. I won't deny it. It's an appealing, simplest, very simple and appealing argument. R1A came from um, steppe because you see it in 2700 BC, Hatyanaho culture near Moscow. Um, and you see steppe ancestry coming into India. So it's very clear that there was migration, and it's extremely clear to them that the existing theories about the steppe people giving language is simplistic for them, and it makes perfect sense for them. That's why they go ahead with it. So now their job is to prove the nuances to it. So, for example,
Mm-hmm.
they will try to prove that Brahmins have slightly more steppe ancestry, so that proves, and so on. So this is their attempt to do that. But they forget that there is another connection, genetic connection between Europe and India, and that's the Iranian component, and it's a much older component. And since I've been reading up on this whole issue, I've realized that the 1500 BCE date for Rigveda
Mm-hmm.
hardly makes any sense to me. It's too late, in my opinion, and that I really do not even care for. Frankly, do not care for out of India or anything of that sort. It's just that the
Mm-hmm.
step theory just doesn't make sense to me. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
primarily just opposed to the step theory. That's how I started all of it. But then, of course, I have to then also explain. Okay, so if it's not the step, then how is there a connection between these languages? And I find the
Mm-hmm.
Iranian component in step to be a perfect vehicle for that
Mm-hmm.
connection.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which goes to show that depending on what model it is we want to corroborate, there might actually be any kind of genetic finding that could confirm it or reject it. Is that true as a generalization of the matter, or that's too simplistic?
No, I didn't totally understand your question. Can you reword it?
Yeah. So, for example, and there's a thought experiment, but let us say that I completely believe in and agree with the out of India theory. So, if I
Okay.
were that persistent and if I were that dedicated to it, then maybe even I'll be able to find some genetic findings that help me prove my model. So, we have to be careful in how we conclude or what conclusions we form from this data. Is that a fair way to put it?
I mean, according to me, if there are enough people for a particular theory,
Mm-hmm.
enough scientists who publish enough papers for a particular theory, especially you
Mm-hmm.
need archaeological and linguistic backup. And if you
Mm-hmm.
have like enough people and enough research, enough linguists who are publishing that Proto-Aryan or Proto-Sanskrit or whatever was the first to branch off, and there are
Mm-hmm.
enough people, then it makes the genetic case extremely easy. So,
Okay.
I mean, I think the way the science works right now is that you convince a large number of researchers to publish a certain theory, and if it gains enough traction, then it's much easier for you to continue based on that work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
as far as out of India is concerned, this is also important, and the Narasimhan paper does not. So, Narasimhan paper also does not emphasize it a lot, although it does report the finding. Shahir-e-Sukte, the burnt city in eastern
Mm-hmm.
Iran near Balochistan, we have samples from 3200 BCE to 2350 BCE, and 2300 BCE is also around the time wherein the city got abandoned. So this is
Okay.
the burnt city because it was apparently burned down. Many buildings were burned down at least two to three times for,
Hmm.
they say, unknown reasons. But I always found it curious because this is one of the sites which shows clear some either shows a clear possibility of some attackers attacking it.
Hmm.
Although it's perfectly plausible that there was some natural mishap. I don't
Hmm.
know. But anyway, the Shahir Sokta people have around 20, 25, 30% ancestry from Indus Valley.
Okay.
The main bunch, the main cluster of Shahir Sokta has 20 to 30% ancestry from Indus periphery.
Hmm.
Um, so IVC people actually, this is the first evidence of out of India gene flow that you can see
Hmm.
here.
Hmm.
Apart from that, we obviously have at least six good quality samples of direct IVC migrants from Shire
Hmm.
Sokte.
Hmm.
So it's extremely clear that this was an out of India migration
Migration.
into eastern Iran.
Hmm.
Um, the second out of India migration that you see in the Narasimhan paper study is migrants to Gonur. So we have
Hmm.
IVC migrants found in Gonur 2100 BCE. Although the main ancestry, so that's the BMAC, that is where the main BMAC people lived. Um, but the BMAC ancestry does not directly show an input from Indus periphery. At least I have not been able to model it directly with that source. Although indirectly, Shire Sokte people, main people, are a source for the BMAC ancestry in Gonur. Plus, Plus, we know that migrants from IVC or area, actually we found their samples there. So these two sites are where we can see traces. We can see out of India migration, and one can wonder whether these 2500, 3000 BC migrations have any bearing on
Hmm.
the split between Indo-Aryan and Iranian. This
Hmm.
is the hypothesis. One can wonder if that is the case, and the because these people, some Indologists say that these are the Dasyus or these are the Dahe,
That's
or
something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So, and we have evidence of Shaire Sokta burning down for whatever reason. I don't know
Hmm.
why people have not, archaeologists have not. I don't even know if they have followed it up whether this was an invasion or natural occurrence.
Hmm.
Maybe it was
Okay.
an invasion. But these are all speculations on my part. But the out
Yeah.
of India migration into Shaire Sokte and migrants into BMAC at Gonur, these are not speculation. These are hard proven facts from the genetic data.
Indeed. Indeed. And to what extent should we incorporate genetic evidence of other animals? So, for example, I think on the domesticated mouse, we now find that its origins might likely have been in the Indian subcontinent, and we know that the domesticated mouse would travel with caravans and human settlements. It wouldn't migrate out on its own. Similarly, there is evidence on the Bos indicus cow and the Bos taurus cow, where we know that Bos indicus has not had any admixture from outside, but the Indian cow has indeed gone outside. Now, cows again are also not nomadic creatures, they will move with human populations. So, what bearing does this kind of data have in the models we build?
So, in the human genetics papers with relation to Indo-European languages and so on, I see none of these papers are cited.
Hmm.
None of the animal DNA papers are cited as evidence in any of these Narasimhan paper or anything published by Harvard Lab. I have not seen any of these papers being used as a reference. I
Hmm.
have not read the mouse paper, but I have read the Bosendicus paper,
Hmm.
which shows increased ancestry from Indus Valley Zebu cows in Syria, starting
Hmm.
from 2000 BC or that time frame onwards,
Hmm.
um, which coincides with the Indo-Aryan names and words
Founded
in the Mitanni
Mithani.
uh, tablets.
Yeah.
There's also increase of horse Indus Valley. There's a paper. I forget the name. The name of the paper is on elephants. I'll share it with you on Twitter maybe, which shows
Sure.
increased presence of ivory and elephant bones in Syria starting 2000 BCE onwards.
Hmm.
So we can so I place a lot of high regard for such evidence because
Hmm.
and the paper themselves show that this cannot have happened without humans migrating along with them.
Hmm.
They
Hmm.
show that these are probably domesticated elephants and domesticated cows. So it shows migration from east, from IVC sort of culture to Syria. And I have high hope that if we do find some Mithani samples,
Hmm.
um, then we should find some connection to IVC or India.
Yeah.
But I have not read the Mouse paper, so I cannot comment, and I'm really not an expert on that also.
Fair.
So
Yeah. Great. So, I just wanted to spend a little bit of time more to talk a bit also on the archaeological, textual, linguistic elements before we conclude. But with all of this genetic discussion, and maybe I'm asking you to maybe reduce it or simplify it too much. But to people who are trying to, because genetics, it sounds to all of us as hard science, and we are kind of inclined to think that okay, if something is proven genetically, then that means it's proven irrefutably and it's now confirmed. So, to people who are looking to understand that, hey, has genetics proved Aryan invasion or migration? Has genetics proved this? Has genetics proved that? What is something you would want people to know on that count, and what would you want them to keep in mind when approaching all of these hard conclusions, if anything at all?
the whole science of this does not the uh, one has to always keep in mind what the original theory was. The
Mm,
original theory has many components. It has that there's migration. Number two, it's that there is a male-mediated migration. That is
mm,
a lot of males and very few females. And third is
mhm,
that there's a time period involved in this, maybe 1600 to 1200 BC or whatever.
mhm,
Because those dates have been arrived at looking at all the corpus, the text, and everything that we have and
mm,
uh, yeah so you always have to keep all these theories in mind. So now if it is
mhm,
proven that in modern Indians the admixture of the step component with the local component is post 1000 BCE,
mm,
then what
mhm,
happens to
mhm.
this theory? Then what happens to
Right,
this original theory? Can
right.
these then you have to um, then the Suvastu Valley sample showed that instead of males coming in large numbers, you see that the very small step ancestry, 15% or so, is
Mhm,
female mediated. So how does it change the theory that was proposed?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
so the third question, the important question is, okay, let's just agree that there's migration because you see autosomal ancestry in Suvastu, 15%. But
sure.
uh, But what's the proof that those were Aryans? I mean, uh,
Correct.
so those are all the questions that people should be asking because I'm not convinced that they were Aryans. I see no proof of them worshipping fire. The BMSC people had fire worship in
Mhm,
fire temples, but they had no step component. The Fedorovo culture, which was a late Andronovo culture, had some fire worship, but those people are Z2124 on the R1A, so they are not related to India.
right.
So there are all these questions which one has to ask, not we just go with the simple. There's some ancestry from step, and there's some R1 way, so hence proved. That's not deep enough.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. And maybe we can just spend now 5, 10 minutes. Even today, I saw that on Twitter you were tweeting about that paper by Giacomo Benedetti, for example,
Right.
which is a very interesting paper. It's about Rigvedic chronology and mapping it to the phases of the Sindhu Saraswati civilization. So on the textual side, the Vedic corpus side, the archaeological side, can you tell us some things that you find interesting, some things that you think are important for the overall context for us to keep in mind? Anything that fascinates you in particular?
For dating the chronology, first of all, I would recommend everyone to read Bryant's book. Let me
Hmm.
just
On
uh,
Indo-Europe.
let me just find out the name. It gives both sides beautifully. Edwin Bryant, is it?
Yeah, Edwin Bryant.
And
Yeah, I think.
one second. Um, it covers all sides very beautifully, and I believe that everyone should know
Yeah.
both sides of the debate, because what I see from the genetic side also, there are people who are saying R1A is 10,000 years old in India and so on. I mean, there's no
Hmm.
proof. We don't have a single sample, so how can they say, such things? So, and they should also know that R1 is actually found in Europe since 7,000 BC as well. And you have to make sense of the data as a whole rather than just uh,
Indeed.
relying
The
on
book is
someone's.
The Quest for the Origins of Vedic Culture by Edwin Bryant.
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful book. It
Hmm.
has so many snippets, so many tidbits, and it collects information from many authors on this field.
Yeah, yeah,
I think
yeah.
it's a must read.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree. In fact, it's one of the only works that at least gives the out of India theory a fair consideration, and which is all that's needed. That
yes.
because we can't a priori exclude it. So, and it draws up some very valid criticisms for other models as well. So, yeah, you're right. That is a must read just for a general landscape.
Um, from the uh, from the Vedic corpus, there are just three things which strike which I think are important. One is the Saraswati river itself.
Hmm.
In the Rig Veda, it's said to be mighty and freely flowing
Yeah,
from the mountains to the
mountain
sea.
to sea. Yeah.
And in Mahabharata, we see that it's shown to
Hmm.
be drying up in some parts and reappearing later down the course at other parts.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So that if you have to consider that, because that's important evidence which can be dated. And I believe there are studies from IIT Bombay which have also dated these events of the Ghaggar channel. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so uh, that's one. The second is that steppe people were not farmers and not agriculturists, but
Yeah. Yeah.
the RV people are very clearly agriculturists as well.
Hmm.
So one has to look at all those things. But I believe there are far more knowledgeable people than me who can speak on this specific subject. Um so I'll defer to their thoughts. But there are a lot of indications in the corpus itself, in the archaeology, which makes me question the step origin. In fact, I was very clear on Eurogenes also in the comment section that I don't care for OIT, but this is just
Hmm.
the step theory is just a preposterous theory. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all. If you tell me that someone from Antarctica came, Aryans came from Antarctica 8,000 years ago, it still will make sense because the timelines fit. 1500
Hmm.
BC just does not fit anything at all.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so that's where I come from. But I mean, my latest analysis basically shows quite clearly that the ancestry which provided the Iran or the India-N ancestry to Indus Valley is also
Hmm.
most likely the same ancestry uh, which provided the Iranian part to the steppe Neolithic ancestry north of the Caucasus. So we have
Yeah, that's key.
this will be the main connecting link between India and Europe, which goes back to 5000 BC, and from the Indian side to the European side.
Yeah.
However, there's just a caveat that where that common ancestry resided, maybe in Iran, maybe in Punjab, maybe in Uzbekistan, we don't know yet because we don't have the
Yeah.
samples.
Indeed. Indeed. Right. Great. Well, that I think that covers everything we could have covered fairly enough right now. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Ashish, for joining. And I must say, at a personal level, look, I admire and respect the work you're doing, and I hope that you continue doing it. And it's important work because, and what's amazing is that just as a primary researcher with personal interest in the field, you are able to simplify these things. I recommend people read your blog, and even just yesterday, I think you tweeted about how some of it may initially seem very technical or complex, but with 20, 30 minutes of some deeper consideration, one is able to understand these issues a bit better. So I
Yes.
recommend people do that with what you're putting out there. So
Thank you,
yeah,
Amritanshu, for this great talk. Enjoyed it. Your questions were also really good, and I hope to collaborate more with you in the future.
that'll be great. That'll be great. All right, thank you everyone for tuning in, and I hope this was of help to you as well. Namaste.